Have you been told that you have pain because you have weakness in a muscle? No, you don't. Something we see almost every time somebody comes into the clinic. They've already tried chiropractics, physical therapy, a lot of other things, and they've been told you have pain, maybe in your low back, or your hip, or your knee. It doesn't matter, but they always attribute it to a very specific muscle. And so what I want to share with you is the difference between weakness and inhibition, and particularly how weakness does not lead to pain, but how strength can prevent you from getting into a painful situation. So here's something that we see very common, and if you've been to therapy, this will probably resonate with you, is a lot of times somebody has low back pain or knee pain, and they'll test the hip like this. Hold right there, hold it, don't let me push it down, and you see the leg just caves, and then automatically they'll say, you have a weak glute medius, okay? But there's a better way to test that, because when you drag the whole leg out here, it ties in not only all of the hip, but also muscles in the trunk. And a lot of times what we see, especially with Keystone Reset, is there's already some underlying dysfunction in the pelvis, which means all the muscles that attach to the pelvis have been disrupted and are probably inhibited in some way. And so what we see most often is that when that tests like that, you can actually not even touch the hip. We can go right here to the quadratus lumborum. And is that tender? Yes. Yeah, I can see his frown from back here. He's not enjoying it, but nobody does, and that's okay, because what's going to happen is we're going to work here for maybe 20 seconds. This isn't even a super comprehensive soft tissue reset, but we're going to just stimulate the muscle to kind of turn back on. Inhibition, the muscle is just not turning on well. It's not functioning super well. It doesn't have the ability to generate force very well. And what happens is you go to push on the long lever of the leg, and rather than the hip actually being weak, the whole pelvis just kind of falls away from the rib cage because the function in this position of the quadratus lumborum is to stabilize the relationship between the top of the pelvis and the bottom of the ribs to keep this very stable. And if this muscle can't contract well, then it's just going to create a gap here, and it's going to have pseudo weakness in the hip. So he's still frowning a little bit, but we've got a good 20 or 30 seconds there. Let's retest real quick. Hold right there. Hold. You can see just after 30 seconds of work, now all of a sudden, he can resist that a whole lot better. Now, is that because we increase the strength in his hip? No, strength is a long game. You can't increase strength in seconds. But what you can do is take a muscle that's not turning on very well and make it turn on. Because when muscles turn on at a higher rate, it looks like there's more strength. You actually just created a new environment in the body where it can just function better. So what we like to do, rather than just assuming the hip is weak, we can test the hip in a little different way, because what we also know is that glute minimus, glute medius, even some of glute max also function to a large degree in hip rotation. And so we can bend up a little further. We're going to leave the heels together, hold the knee right here. Now when we push, hold, that's very strong. Now, I probably should have tested that first. It would have been just as strong without this here, and then you would have seen the discrepancy between truly testing the hip versus actually jumping up here into the quadratus lumborum, doing something different. But that's the way we test the hip, is because these muscles function in rotation. If they're weak in rotation, they're probably also weak in just pure abduction. But in this case, and almost every time we see the long lever test look really weak, the short lever test in the rotation is normal. So we jump up into the quadratus lumborum, create some change there, and almost within seconds, you can increase the ability for the body to be more stable. Okay, now, these are just the downstream effects a lot of times of instability in the pelvis, creating changes around the pelvis and the relationship between the pelvis and core stability and function. But I wanted to show you that because a lot of times what happens is they'll do the long lever test and it looks weak, and then they'll give you a lot of clamshells just work trying to make the muscle stronger and a bunch of leg raises out to the side, trying to make the muscle produce more force, when really those things aren't necessary at all, because we allowed him to create more force by working here rather than just trying to add strength and activity on top of a muscle that didn't actually need it, okay? So, we don't ever attribute pain to weakness in a specific muscle. That's just not how the body is knit together. And you can increase all you want, but if you don't change the underlying reasons why that muscle is, we'll call it weak for lack of a better term, but why is this hip weak and not the other one? Okay, there's something you have to walk back to figure out why is that even going on. And if you don't do that, there's no amount of strength you can add to that specific muscle that's going to change pain to a very large degree. But what we do see is that people don't have pain because they're weak. They have pain because they're participating in things frequently and consistently that require more physical strength than they have. So it's not because they're weak. It's because the demands of their lifestyle are too high for what they are currently operating on. And so that is how weakness can stack into pain, but it's not because you're weak, because, we have little old ladies that are weak as a kitten, but they don't have pain because their lifestyle is way down here. Just the threshold is so low. Similarly, what we see is that even in the presence of functional mobility limitation, if you have very high levels of physical strength, and we're talking global functional physical strength, not isolated strength in a hip or a QL or a quad or a knee or whatever. We're talking about squats, deadlifts, overhead press, the ability for your body to be physically strong through functional movement positions. What we see is that the stronger, thicker, more resilient the tissues are through functional movement strength, the more difficult it is to have pain because of the resilience you've built up in your tissues. You just almost have a suit of armor on the inside because stronger, thicker muscles allow you to get away with more movement errors over longer periods of time without turning into a painful condition. This is also why it's super important to know what your limitations are. If you know what your limitations are and you know where your boundaries are, you know you can step out of bounds and be okay. But if you're stepping out of bounds by accident because you don't know your limitations and your boundaries of functional mobility and strength, you're going to stack up into pain eventually. But strong individuals who know their limitations and know their boundaries of movement can step out of bounds on purpose, kind of push the limits a little bit over and over and over again, but because they know they're stepping past the limit, they also know when to bring it back so that they don't do too much, too fast, go too far, and end up purposefully creating a setback. So this is why it's important to know your requirements for mobility, always be pushing the limits of functional strength to expose your limitations so that you can rehab and prevent, but also create a huge hedge against pain, all right? And if you go somewhere and you have back pain, knee pain, foot pain, and they say you have pain because your glute med is weak, right out the door. Go find somebody who will help you identify what are your mobility limitations, what are your functional strength limitations, and how can we start to trace out why the whole system isn't functioning well rather than getting stuck on this isolated thing that's probably not going to give you that much results. See you later.